Keanu Reeves has always carried an air of quiet sadness, like a man who has seen too much of life yet never complains. He lost his father when he was just 3, his best friend before turning 30, his daughter before she could even breathe, and the woman he loved in a tragic crash. Through all these heartbreaks, Keanu never lashed out. He never blamed anyone. Instead, he forgave, endured, and kept moving forward. But even a soul as gentle as Keanu's has its breaking point, because there was one wound he could never truly heal, one act of betrayal that cut deeper than death itself. And the cruelest part, it came from someone he once called a friend. Keanu's story begins far from the glitz of Hollywood. Born on September 10, 1964 in Beirut, Lebanon, a city trembling on the edge of chaos. His father, Samuel Nowlin Reeves Jr., a Hawaiian Chinese geologist, walked out on the family when Keanu was only 3 years old. That single act of abandonment would shape every shadow in his life. His mother, Patricia Taylor, a British costume designer, tried desperately to keep the family together. She moved from country to country, Beirut to Sydney, Sydney to New York, and finally Toronto, chasing the dream of stability that always seemed one step out of reach. By the age of 10, Keanu had already packed up his childhood too many times to count. No roots, no lasting friends, just an endless cycle of new schools and tearful goodbyes. And as if that wasn't enough, dyslexia made it school another battlefield. Teachers mistook his struggle for laziness. His report cards were filled with failing grades, and soon the classrooms that should have built his confidence only crushed it further. By 17, he dropped out completely. It looked like failure, yet it was actually the first step toward his true destiny, because it was the stage, not the classroom, where Keanu would finally find his voice. But home still offered no comfort. His mother's marriages brought in a parade of stepfathers, men who seemed promising at first, but none who stayed. One of them, filmmaker Paul Aaron, introduced him to theater and the magic of performance, but even that marriage ended within a year. At 13, Keanu saw his biological father for the last time. There were no hugs, no apologies, just an awkward silence that said more than words ever could. He walked away that day without realizing he would never see his father again. Those early scars, abandonment, instability, loss, would define him. They gave him resilience, yes, but they also taught him something else. That trust is fragile, and once broken, it may never be whole again. And decades later, that painful lesson would return in a betrayal that would haunt him for the rest of his life. By the mid-1980s, Keanu Reeves was still just another dreamer chasing a place in an industry that rarely opened its doors to outsiders. At 20 years old, he worked as a youth correspondent for CBC in Toronto, earning only $200 a week. It was far from glamorous, but every interview, every camera angle, every moment in that small TV studio became a stepping stone toward something greater. Behind the scenes, Keanu was relentless. He auditioned for every part he could find. Small commercials, bit roles, even the student films. But Hollywood didn't make things easy. Even his name, Keanu, was considered too strange. Agents told him it sounded too ethnic. For 2 long years, he reluctantly went by Casey Reeves, but deep down, he knew pretending to be someone else was the real failure. So in 1987, he took his name back. If I fail, he told himself, I'll fail as me. That same year, he landed his first breakthrough in River's Edge, a haunting story about lost youth. Critics praised his restrained emotion, his ability to say everything through silence. It wasn't flashy, it was real. And that honesty became the hallmark of Keanu Reeves. Then in 1989 came the movie that changed everything, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. What was meant to be a goofy, low-budget comedy became a cultural phenomenon, earning over $40 million. Audiences fell in love with Ted, the wide-eyed, innocent soul who never mocked, never pretended. And through that role, they fell in love with Keanu himself. Overnight, he was a star, but Keanu had no interest in being boxed in. He turned away from easy fame, choosing roles that tested his limits instead of feeding his ego. From Dangerous Liaisons, 1988, where he stood alongside John Malkovich and Glenn Close, to Parenthood, 1989, where he played a troubled yet tender young man, Keanu showed range that surprised everyone. Yet fame didn't erase the loneliness. He was adored by millions, but still carried that quiet ache of the boy who had no home. His success was built on endurance, but deep down, he knew how fragile trust could be. Soon, that truth would strike again, because in the decade that followed, Keanu would experience both his greatest friendships and his deepest heartbreak. The 1990s were the decade that carved Keanu Reeves into Hollywood legend. He was no longer the shy outsider, he was the face audiences couldn't look away from. But behind the camera flashes and magazine covers, life continued to test him in ways far beyond fame. In 1991, Keanu starred in 2 films that would shape his career and reveal the depth of his soul. The first was Point Break, where he played Johnny Utah, an FBI agent torn between duty and friendship, chasing a band of surfers led by Patrick Swayze. The film exploded at the box office, earning over $83 million. But what audiences remembered most wasn't just the action. It was the quiet bond between Utah and Bodhi, 2 men on opposite sides of the law but connected by trust. Reeves brought a calm, wounded strength to the role that made him unforgettable. That same year, he made one of the bravest choices of his career with My Own Private Idaho. Directed by Gus Van Sant, the film explored loneliness, love, and the search for belonging. Reeves played Scott Favor, a privileged rebel who befriends Mike, a narcoleptic street hustler portrayed by River Phoenix. Their connection on screen was electric, but off a screen, it was something far deeper. Keanu and River became brothers in spirit. They shared motorcycles, music, and long soul-searching conversations about life and art. When the studio hesitated to cast River, Keanu famously rode his motorcycle over 153 miles just to convince him to take the part. That kind of loyalty, unshakable and pure, was the kind of friend Keanu was. But on the night of October 31st, 1993, Hollywood's bright lights dimmed. River Phoenix collapsed outside the Viper Room in Los Angeles after a drug overdose. He was only 23. When Keanu heard the news, he was in the middle of filming Speed. Sandra Bullock, his co-star, later said she could see the pain behind his calm expression. His eyes, she recalled, were full of grief that never left him. River's death shattered Keanu. He didn't talk about it, didn't cry in public. He simply carried that pain inside him quietly, as he always had. Another loved one gone, another goodbye he never got to say. But from that heartbreak came a deeper drive. If life could take everything without warning, then the only way to fight back was through purpose. And Keanu's purpose was to keep creating, to keep moving forward, no matter how much it hurt. After losing River Phoenix, Keanu Reeves buried his grief in work. In 1994, He'd starred in Speed alongside Sandra Bullock, a film that would redefine his career and turn him into a global action hero. But the journey there wasn't smooth. The studio executives doubted him. They thought his new cropped hair looked too severe, too different. Some even questioned whether audiences would accept him as an action lead. But when Speed hit theaters, it exploded. The film earned $350 million worldwide, transforming Reeves from a quiet actor into Hollywood's newest star. His chemistry with Sandra Bullock was undeniable, their connection subtle but magnetic. Two people saving lives while hiding unspoken emotions beneath every glance. And when the studio came back, offering a fortune for the Speed 2, everyone assumed he'd say yes. But Keanu didn't. He took one look at the script and shook his head. It's called Speed, and it's on a cruise ship, he reportedly told a friend. Cruise ships barely hit 30 miles per hour. That decision, simple, logical, yet defiant, angered the studio so much that they blacklisted him for over a decade. From 1997 to 2008, 20th Century Fox refused to work with him again. Most actors would have broken under that kind of pressure, choosing fame over principle. But Keanu wasn't most actors. Instead of chasing blockbusters, he went back to his roots, acting for the sake of art. He performed Hamlet on a stage in Winnipeg, Canada, delivering one of the most hauntingly human versions of the prince ever seen. Critics called it raw, unguarded, and sincere. Ironically, A Speed 2, the film he refused, became one of Hollywood's biggest flops, losing tens of millions. Keanu had not only protected his career, he had protected his dignity. And just when everyone thought he'd faded, he returned with a storm that would change cinema forever. In 1999, The Matrix was released, a $60 million sci-fi gamble that earned nearly $500 million worldwide. Reeves, once again the unlikely choice, after Will Smith and Leonardo DiCaprio turned it down, became Neo, the man who questioned reality itself. The role made him a cultural icon. Black trench coats, slow-motion bullet time, philosophical dialogue, it all became part of film history. But just as the world celebrated him as a living legend, tragedy struck once more. In December 1999, Keanu and his girlfriend, actress Jennifer Syme, welcomed a daughter, Ava Archer Syme Reeves. But the baby was a stillborn. The grief broke them both. They remained close, but the weight of loss was unbearable. Less than 2 years later, Jennifer died in a car crash at only 28. For Keanu, it was a nightmare he couldn't wake from. He had faced loss before, but this time it was different. This time it felt like the universe had taken everything he had left. And yet, even then, he didn't lash out. He didn't blame fate. He simply went quiet again, carrying the pain with that same silent dignity that had always defined him. But destiny wasn't done testing him, because the next wound wouldn't come from tragedy. It would come from betrayal, and this time it would come from someone he trusted. Through all his losses, Keanu Reeves remained astonishingly forgiving. He never spoke ill of his father despite being abandoned. He never lashed out at critics who mocked his acting. And even after death took those he loved, he carried his grief with grace and silence. But in the year 2000, something happened that broke even his quiet endurance. This time it wasn't fate or tragedy, it was betrayal. The kind that doesn't take your life, but poisons your trust. Fresh off the worldwide success of The Matrix, Keanu was one of the most sought-after stars in Hollywood. Scripts poured in, studios begged for his name on their posters, yet suddenly he found himself trapped, legally forced to star in a film he had never agreed to make. The movie was The Watcher, a psychological thriller about a serial killer stalking women. Keanu had no interest in the project, no emotional connection, no creative spark. So how did he end up starring in it? Because someone he trusted, a man he once called a friend, forged his signature on the contract. That man was Joe Charbanek, the film's director. Charbanek wasn't just a colleague, he had directed several music videos for Keanu's band, Dog Star. Their friendship went back years, but Charbanek saw an opportunity to cast Reeves in his film and guarantee his studio attention, and he took it. When Keanu found out, it was already too late. The deal was binding. If he refused to act, he could face a lawsuit that would cost him millions. So he did the only thing he could. He honored a promise he never made. He performed the role quietly, professionally, and for the minimum union wage, earning less than his co-stars. When The Watcher was released in September 2000, it was a disaster. Critics tore it apart. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a humiliating 11%. Roger Ebert called Keanu's performance thankless, describing his character as flat and uninspired. But no one knew the truth, that he had never wanted to be there in the first place. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Keanu spoke about it a year later in The Guardian. A friend of mine forged my signature on the agreement. I couldn't prove it, and I didn't want to get sued, so I did the movie. It was the only time he admitted to hate, not the burning rage of revenge, but a quiet, permanent wound. Because betrayal is different from loss. Death takes the people you love, but betrayal steals the love itself. And for Keanu, that was the one thing he could never forgive. The fallout from The Watcher could have ended Keanu Reeves's career. Critics mocked him. Studios questioned his judgment. For years, he drifted between films that never quite matched the brilliance of The Matrix. But true to his nature, Keanu didn't chase attention, he waited. He waited for something meaningful, something worth believing in again. And in 2014, it finally arrived, John Wick, a modestly budgeted action film about a widowed assassin seeking revenge for his murdered dog. It sounded absurd on paper, but when Keanu stepped into the role, everything changed. His quiet grief, his restrained fury, his stillness between gunfire, it all felt real. It wasn't just a movie about vengeance. It was about loss, pain, and the silent endurance of a man who had already lost everything. The film earned $86 million on a $20 million budget and reignited Keanu's career overnight. By the time John Wick Chapter 4 premiered in 2023, the franchise had crossed $1 billion worldwide, and Keanu had become an icon once again, a symbol of resilience, humility, and rebirth. But even as the world celebrated him, Hollywood's cruelty resurfaced. In 2022, actor Matthew Perry wrote in his memoir, "Why do brilliant actors like River Phoenix and Heath Ledger die, but Keanu Reeves still walks among us?" The comment shocked fans around the world. Outrage flooded social media. Yet Keanu, as always, said nothing. He never fired back, never defended himself. His silence spoke louder than any insult ever could. And then, in September 2024, Keanu turned 60. After decades of pain, loss, and reinvention, he was finally asked in an interview what moment had scarred him most. He smiled, a weary, distant smile, and gave an answer no one expected. "It wasn't my father," he said softly. "It wasn't the critics. It wasn't even Matthew Perry." He paused, as if the words themselves carried weight. "The person I truly hated, the only one I could never forgive, was Joe Charbanek. For more than 2 decades, Keanu had buried that betrayal deep within him. He had forgiven every abandonment, survived every tragedy, endured every cruelty in silence. But betrayal from a friend, the kind that turns trust into poison, was the wound that never healed. At 60, he finally let the truth breathe. And in that truth, he showed the world something powerful, that even the kindest souls have scars, that even forgiveness has limits, and that sometimes surviving isn't about letting go, it's about remembering who you are and what you stand for. Keanu Reeves, the man who lost everything, who was broken again and again, yet still chose kindness, had one final confession to make. He could forgive the world, but not the one who betrayed his heart. What about you? Do you think betrayal hurts deeper than loss? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one.